something I've been working on lately, mostly because I have a radar gun, and it's really easy to get feedback when you have a radar gun. It's less easy, I think, when you don't, but so I just wanted to talk about things that I've learned with that immediate feedback. So I think I have to kind of give a caveat here. So this is something that, it's worked for me, so don't take this as, the absolute truth. It's just something that has worked for me. It may not work for you, but it's something I've been kind of looking at, like pitching videos, baseball pitching, and the mechanics that they use seems to kind of translate pretty well from baseball to slinging. I mean, it's all the same rotational motion. And so there's kind of two main things that have worked for my form that I kind of want to talk about. Like generally, first, it's a rotational movement, and so with just about every sport with rotational movements, there's this concept of hip to shoulder separation. So, when you're throwing, you tend to, you want to move your hips, rotate your hips while your shoulders stay not rotated. So when I talk about shoulder to hip separation, that's what the term they use in baseball is. It's the same thing. So my shoulders stay put, my hips rotate, and then the shoulders rotate through. The same with slinging or disc golf. In disc golf, you turn your hips before your shoulders rotate through, and in slinging, you want to rotate your hips before you throw. Okay, so that's the kind of, I guess, the athletic movement part of it. The other thing is that it's a little bit, it's synonymous, but also a little bit different with slinging and baseball. With baseball, the best pitchers get the most velocity because they get this, large hip to shoulder separation, but they also, so they can generate a lot of force, but they also really make a long path length. Because, if you talk a little physics, if you're gonna put the most energy into a projectile, you either have to have a larger force over the same distance or the same force over a longer distance. So if you can, there's only so much force you can really generate with your arm. So if you can increase the path length, you can impart more energy into the projectile. So there's two things that I've found that help with that, and that is one for one thing. So I used to just kind of raise my arm up here and rotate through when I'd sling, but hopefully you can see this from the back. If I hold my arm up here and rotate, you can see my hand doesn't really move. It kind of stays stationary. It doesn't actually make a big path. But if you bring your hand up a little higher and then rotate, you can see it's a lot larger of a circle, I guess. So that's one thing that I learned was if I bring my hand up as high as I can and then rotate, it makes a much larger circle. You get a little bit more velocity that way. That was one of the biggest things I learned. The other thing was, because you're trying to increase the force over a distance, if you can generate that force over a longer path, so sooner over a longer path, you can also generate more velocity. So one of the things was, this idea of the hip to shoulder separation. If you start your step before you even start your wind up, so if you step and turn your hips before you've even really started winding up, it seems to help quite a bit. So, step and then do your wind up and throw, as opposed to, wind up and throw at the same time. You just don't get any hip to shoulder separation when you do them at the same time. So, a hip, that's one thing I like to try to focus on is step, hip, and then throw. Step, and then hip, and then throw. Anyway, so those are a couple of things that helped me get more velocity. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, I just watched the footage and just realized I neglected to talk about an important part. On this idea of starting the step before the rest of the movement, the reason that's important is because if you do at the same time, you step and you start to wind up, you end up with the sling kind of, I don't know, if 12 o'clock is that way, you end up with the sling kind of at, I don't know, 7 o'clock or so, before you really start the really high force portion of the throw, I like to call the power stroke. You don't really start the power stroke until the sling's already kind of through most of its motion. And so, this force over distance, you're not generating that high force over the longest distance you can, so you don't get as much velocity. So if if your power stroke is starting with the sling at pretty much anywhere but 9 o'clock, or even sooner if you can, depending on how your mechanics work, you're losing out velocity. So really, you want to be able to generate that force over the longest path. So this delay of starting the step and then the throw, it really helps you generate force over a longer, generate higher force over a longer path length. And that's what really having this radar gun really helped me with, was seeing that when I would step first and then start the throw. Basically the sling it's kind of like here-ish when I actually I step, get the sling up here, and then start my power stroke. So it's it's almost like 270 degrees of acceleration, as opposed to when I do the step and the throw at the same time. It's much less, like probably less than 180 or something. So that's kind of the reason for the delay on the wind up. If you step first, then start your wind up, it really seems to help with the whole. It gets you a longer power stroke, and I think that's really key to getting more velocity. Okay, so that's it.